Well, ladies and gentlemen, the news in South Africa just keeps getting more interesting, doesn't it? Anyway, before we start on with the main news for the day, can I please yet again remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to support the work that I do here, you're welcome to buy me a coffee. The link is in the description box below, so let's get straight into it. For those of you who haven't followed the news, Hunter Biden is in South Africa, which is rather interesting, you see, because in the United States, Hunter Biden is actually currently going through a court case in LA, California. Basically, during that court case, he declared that he was broke. Yep, he was broke, and, that really restricted him in terms of what he could do. But he's now in South Africa, and he's been seen on a game drive at some of the most expensive restaurants and hotels in South Africa.
Beautiful color, you wonder if it's upside down.
Those eyes, look how pretty.
Pretty eyes, huh?
Wow.
Wow. Now, Trump, at the same time, has rescinded all of Biden's pardons. For those of you who haven't been keeping up on the rationality behind rescinding the pardons, basically Trump said the pardons were signed with an electronic signature. And the electronic signature meant that actually what had happened is that the pardons weren't legit, and so he's challenged the validity of them. And as a result, Hunter's lost all his pardons, and he is subject to basically being tried. So would you know it, he's in South Africa. For we don't really know what reasons. Now, Trump was obviously told about this, and he said that was very interesting, and he described it as, and I quote, ridiculous that he would be here. At the same time, he revoked his Secret Service protection, that's Hunter's Secret Service protection, and basically said that he would be looking into it. So, moving then on to the next news story, and this is a hit piece done by a writer on ROL, and it's a very interesting hit piece because, according to this individual, white capital in South Africa basically holds black people back, and how they're doing that is through the hostages of the banks. So basically, this is a direct attack against banks in South Africa and basically private-owned capital. Now, what becomes very interesting is actually the rationality behind it. And ultimately, the rationality appears to be that effectively capitalism bad, socialism good. If you want to get forms of equality in South Africa, you basically need to privatize the banks and usher in socialism. Why would they say you should do this? Well, it isn't because socialism produces better outcomes. It's because of equity and inclusion and racism. White supremacy in typical fashion. So we need socialism to combat white capital and white supremacy. That appears to be the logical argument. Anyway, this was an argument pushed forward in ROL. Now, the reason that this article is actually interesting is because, yet again, it's an example of the media's attack on the establishment in a bid to basically usher in what's called a socialism. But the actual author of the actual article is very, very curious because many individuals are not sure that he actually exists. There was a quote from Ronaldo Close in November 20th, 2024, where he basically questioned whether this individual was actually a real person. As you will notice, even from their bio, there's no picture attached to this. And so many individuals don't actually know if the author of this hit piece is a real author, or if they're a ghost author in the media franchise. Now, this specific media franchise, ROL, let us not forget that they could actually just be, Iqbal, the owner. And many individuals have suggested that that may be the case. If you actually do a Google search on the actual reporter, they do come up in a case against First Rand Bank. Now, is this the same individual? I don't know. But if they are, this relates to a payment which the individual was trying to get from the bank and basically ultimately lost, with the bank winning. So if this is the same individual, they may have let's call it a grudge against banks. If it's not the same individual, I have to ask you, well, who are they? And me asking you that question, I would not be alone, because many individuals can't actually say who the individual is. Now, if you do look at the work that they generally tend to produce, well, we got articles such as why Taiwan's accusations against South Africa are baseless. This comes obviously against the idea that Taiwan is saying basically the South African government is negatively viewing it basically because it wants to hand it over to China, which is true. That is a real thing. You'll then find that there are other news articles such as Golan, the infamous individual on Twitter who basically criticizes the ANC quite a lot. Is he a paid agent with a racist twist? Okay. Then we have the dangerous dance of media and politics. Well, this actually happened around the time that IOL was taken to the press ombudsman, and the press ombudsman found against IOL, and as a result, IOL withdrew itself from the press council. Interesting. A hit piece was then issued in the Africa against, obviously, the whole conglomerate and the way that everything fits together. Then you have The Battle for Media Freedom by Dr. Iqbal and IOL's fight against South African democracy. Okay, so now we can see that the actual angle, the content that the individual produces, seems to have a specific flavor. And I find this interesting that yet again we are finding the individual producing content that basically has a political bend. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is everything that's wrong with South African journalism. In many instances, you'll see the actual article we are drawing reference to does not say it's an opinion piece. It is pushed forward as journalism. It's important to realize that at the end of every one of my videos, I say this is just my opinion, because these are opinion pieces. I'm not here to be a journalist. In fact, I use independent sources, which I quote, to show you exactly what I am referring to. So if you have any form of question, you can see it for yourself. And this piece was not put forward as an opinion piece. Now, it does have an opinion tag, but it doesn't really say explicitly that it's opinion, if that makes sense to you. I think this is interesting because it's passed off as if it's factual, and it's passed off as if it's somehow an accurate reflection or depiction of the banking system in South Africa, which it is not. And some individuals, such as the MK Party, may use articles such as these to push forward certain forms of policy legislation, knowing full well that the article is BS. Anyway, talking on to other BS topics, this is the news that the presidency actually got involved in the Johannesburg dispute to rename the US consulate's address, Sandton Drive, to one terrorist place. And apparently the presidency had to now get involved and say, guys, you need to postpone this. Our relationship now with the United States is a bit perilous, and this isn't possibly the best time to do this. So what it's effectively going to do is make us look guilty of everything they say we are. And it's nice to see that the individual actually notices this. Anyway, on other news, apparently South Africa condemns the deadly Israeli airstrikes in Gaza and calls for a ceasefire and aid access. Yep, so we're getting involved in Israel again. So in one respect, we're actually recognizing that renaming the street to one terrorist drive is going to annoy the US. And then in the next breath, we continue to antagonize one of the US's key allies. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. In any case, let's actually look to see then what else is going on. Well, this actually, as you will recall, Trump has basically extended an offer to South African farmers that basically said they can apply for refugee status in the US. And this is the news that the agricultural industry is saying, well, they've actually never been more optimistic in South Africa than they are now. And they don't want to go. They want to stay in South Africa and make South Africa a better place. which I think is commendable. There is other news that up to 250,000 Afrikaners have already expressed interest to leave South Africa and take Trump up on his offer. And that's a serious amount of the population. So, which is it? Oh, I'm not entirely sure. So, on then to the final news. And this is the news that the Klerk Foundation basically says during its annual report card on South Africa that South Africa needs to focus on economic inclusion rights. Which is very interesting because I have to ask the question, what economic inclusion rights are they specifically referring to? Now, you may ask the question whether or not they were referring specifically to the onerous BEE legislation, which is now currently in the domain of, well, many international organizations. The World Bank itself has said that BEE legislation specifically impacts South Africa's economy and has led to massive declines in the potential growth forecast. So in other words, we're not actually getting growth, and a lot of it can be put down to BEE, which everybody knows apart from the ANC, because they feel it's a vote winner. Now, very interestingly, the Klerk Foundation obviously highlighted 10 issues which they said South Africa urgently needed to fix. The first one was around food and healthcare. They basically talked around how the procurement of funds, the Procurement Fund Act, the specific preferential procurement fund framework, was actually causing there to be inequalities. And they did say that the NHI and the way that that procurement framework would look may exacerbate these issues. They then talked about children's rights, specifically in relation to nutrition. And this obviously comes on the back of the fact that many of these kids are actually not being fed properly, which leads to forms of malnutrition, basically because they are being funded by social grants or even the school nutritional programs, and those are inadequate. Now, because of malnutrition, that means that these individuals' brains and their bodies aren't actually developing correctly. The next is around the freedom of trade, and this specifically comes against the backdrop that we have a high unemployment rate, which is currently at 35.4% on the projected scale. Now, interestingly, this is also mixed with inequality, which both mean that these lead to greater crime. And the Klerk Foundation is saying that it's basically crime and the threat of crime, which is the critical barrier to safety to entry into the workplace. I don't think that's necessarily true. Safety has never been on a lot of the people that I've talked to. There's never been their primary reason for not wanting to start a business or saying that actually I can't get to business because of safety. It's actually usually the onerous costs of getting capital and also the BE legislation that is attached to it and also the onerous labor laws that are attached. That's not even before you discuss the onerous licensing rules. The next is obviously around firearms mismanagement and around the right to life, specifically around the inefficiencies in law. Now, it's very interesting that he would highlight the high murder rate and firearms mismanagement, and one would have to ask, what exactly are we referring to here? Is that how the ANC have made it more difficult to own firearms for the purpose of self-defense or not? And they haven't really expanded on that. But apparently the other threats to South Africa's way of life is also threats to our freedom, security purposes, the Expanded Expropriation Act. Education is obviously the Bella Bill and the centralization of control and freedom of expression, specifically with the passing of the Prevention and Combating of Hate Crimes and Hate Speech Act of 2020, which could in reality actually silence a lot of your views, because any view done online that is classed as a form of hate speech could basically be subject to legal sanction. And the last one is actually around the rights of privacy. This is specifically in relation to the regulation of interception of communication, provision of communication-related information amendment bill. Yeah, it's a long act, also known as the RICA Amendment Bill, which may lead to basically forms of surveillance on you, viewer. Right, these are all the reasons that de Klerk says that we need to be more wary of government. And I would say, I live in South Africa, but you don't need to tell me to be wary of the government. I see them every single day. I'm really as anti-government as they come. I don't need you to tell me otherwise. Anyway, these are just all my views, all very interesting. You can let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until tomorrow, bye.
Nina madoda, the biggest mistake you make is to undermine women, especially black men. Do you know? Let me tell you. Do you know white men treat us black women better than you people
No,
do?
they don't.
Are you a woman?
No,
Are you
I'm
a black
man.
woman?
I'm a man, and I grew up with whites. And the thing is, this is that our sisters, because going to the white society gives you economic benefits, they think that they're being treated better, but you're not being treated better.
So we must know how the treatment feels based on your perception of it.
I'm telling you as an observer who's had white male
I'm telling
friends
you as an experiencer.
you can experience it,
Yeah.
but you experiencing it, right? You must understand that I'm as a man. I could be the most evil man in the world. I could want something bad to happen to a girl.
I'm not talking about that. I'm not
talking about
going
me.
deep. I'm not going deep.
No,
I'm
but I'm
saying
just
to
saying.
you, I'm talking about social interactions nabelung.
They're all
I'm not
fake.
talking about
All
umuntu
fake.
engishade naye.
All of them are
It
fake.
doesn't matter. But let me tell you something what
Yeah.
a woman needs from a man.
What?
Fake it.
No.
Rather fake it not.
No, I cannot.
Yekelani ukudelela abantu besifazane, because abantu besifazane are much more dangerous than you.
Yeah, we know that. I've learned.
Much, because our physical muscles are 50% weaker than yours.
Therefore, your manipulation muscles.
It's not manipulation.
Okay.
One, we are superior to you in many ways,
Yes.
right? We breed, we take your sperm and we process it,
Yeah.
and we give a baby to you.
Yeah.
Number
but we
one.
decide if it's male or female.
Masingayifundi leyo ngane, siyayi-aborta singakutsheli.
Yeah, that's the most heinous thing.
Two, umuntu wesifazane has got an intuition much sharper than yours.